Well, Mike and Cathie, it's great to see you. This is an honor to be on stage with both of you.
Likewise.
So this will be a great conversation. We'll keep it sort of institutional focused. I know we've got a Wall Street and crypto audience here. Let's start with the big news of the last week. Fidelity getting into 401ks, letting employers have the option to put Bitcoin or allow Bitcoin as an investment in retirement funds. I'd love to get your take on this. Do you think it's a good idea?
I think it's a huge competitive advantage for them. I remember with my own IRA, I was trying with just GBTC to get it transferred and, and then also underlying Bitcoin, and nope, wouldn't. And no one wanted to provide the custody. So this is a breakthrough for crypto in the retirement asset world.
And as far as adoption as well, do you think this is a big deal for more people allocating to crypto?
I absolutely do. I do think so.
What about Galaxy? You're going to start offering Bitcoin in your 401ks?
We let all our guys do the 401k if they want. Listen, this is a story of adoption, right? Every year, every month, somewhere around the world, people are selling the Bitcoin story, and people are deciding to store some of their hard-earned wealth in this digital asset secured by trust. And access is hard, right? Fidelity's customers are not 20 and 30 years old, right? They're baby boomers who don't feel as comfortable as some of you crypto degens, moving around crypto on your phones. And so as we get more people to have an easier access into the system, you're just going to see more people buying it. And you're going to see the same thing when the ETF happens. Knock on wood, it happens sometime. But I do think we'll have an ETF this year, or maybe the beginning of next year. You're going to see another wave of people. And so the more people, we always forget Bitcoin's only 13 years old. And really, from an institutional perspective, it didn't start until about 2 years ago. Right? And so we're at the very beginning of this kind of adoption revolution, and I think it's a huge piece of news. I'm surprised the market didn't go up more yesterday.
Really?
The world's kind of in crises, but that's big news.
Yeah.
Kudos to Abby Johnson. She's been on Bitcoin for at least, I think 8-9 years. She used to mine in her office. She's the CEO of Fidelity, so she's been priming the company for this for a very long time.
Right.
I think it's a huge competitive advantage for Fidelity.
Absolutely. Well, I wonder, when we're talking about mainstream portfolios, why they haven't gone a step further and started offering it for individual brokerage accounts. Do you expect that to be next for Schwab, Fidelity, and some of the big players?
Well, I do think that that Fidelity has basically it's open sea competition now, so I think they're going to be forced into this.
What does that mean, you think, for FTX, for Coinbase, for some of the crypto exchanges? Is that a competitive threat?
To some extent. I mean, sure, at the margins, this is retirement accounts at Fidelity, as Mike said, a certain demographic and so forth, but not really the demographic that is moving rapidly into this world.
Got it.
Yeah.
Sort of dipping their toes in.
One reason it's such a big deal is the lion's share of the wealth in America and in the West is still owned by baby boomers, right? Millennials make up 30% of the workforce. They own 5% of the wealth. Sorry, guys, you guys got to get on the stick. And so the big wealth of America is owned by people that aren't as crypto literate. And so giving them easier access is a big deal. I think whoever goes first, Schwab, Fidelity, with their brokerage accounts, and it's just fear, right? They want to see one of them go first and they'll all go.
Right.
It's like when Paul Jones got in the hedge fund space and wrote that letter, it opened up the door for every other hedge fund to participate. Because now you can be right or wrong on the bet, but you're not going to feel stupid.
Is there anything on the regulatory side you think they're waiting for? We got the executive order, but is there something that could come out of Washington that would make them feel comfortable in the near term?
I think it's time. It literally is. Again, Texas teachers wrote a letter that they're going to invest in both venture and coins themselves. Really brave thing to do for a big state pension fund. Strategic, right? Texas wants Bitcoin people to come there just like Miami wants them. And so they're saying, okay, we're going to send a message to people that we're future forward thinking. But that opens the door for other pension funds. Right. Texas teachers can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Cambridge Associates, which is one of the consultants to the pension world. They actually rang the bell for this, I'm going to say, in 2018. They wrote a report to their institution saying, you may not like this, but it is a new asset class, and you have to make a decision one way or the other. So that was a little bit of a booster, but then many institutions are looking at the regulatory environment and saying, well, okay, that's not clear yet. I don't think we can take this risk. So, once we get clarity, more clarity, and I do think the President's executive order is important, getting everyone in gear. And I think really important is Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury. A year ago, I was asked, probably on CNBC, why she hated, why she was so down on crypto, the environmental, the illicit activity, and so forth. She had nothing positive to say. Boom. 1 year later, the president and I'm wondering, okay, someone's whispering in their ears.
Yeah. Oh no, it's not someone whispering. It's the crypto community yelling.
That's true. That's true.
There are 50 million owners of crypto in America. Probably 25 million really passionate single-issue voters. And so Democratic politicians had a wake-up call. I mean, it's shocking. I'm a Democrat. Cathie's not. So we can be on both sides of the aisle. How many politicians are reaching out to Galaxy, to me, say, hey, can you educate us? They realize they need an opinion. Being anti-crypto is really bad politics.
This is a bipartisan issue. Yeah. That's what's so great about it, right?
Are you finding that it's bipartisan? It feels like we've had some high-profile testimonies in front of Congress where both sides of the aisle really have gone after crypto, but it seems actually like Republicans may be embracing it slightly more. Would you agree with that?
And I think, the difference, one of the differences is, and now this is a Democrat, Senator Wyden, he's embracing crypto because it's a new technology first. Whereas you'll have others on the more progressive side who are not, because they're thinking from a financial services point of view, and they have certain constituencies there. So I think those who are thinking technology first, we cannot lose this competition globally. The US needs to be at the bleeding edge. This is the next generation internet, right? Yeah. These are revolutions, money, financial services, and NFTs or next generation internet. So I think those who are thinking about it from a technology point of view have a much easier time supporting it.
Got it. Well, while we're talking about DC, you mentioned a Bitcoin ETF. ARK had an application that was denied recently.
Yes.
What's the next step for ARK, and what's your expectation for a spot Bitcoin ETF to be approved?
Maybe Mike knows more in terms
Mike's
of
got a timeline.
We will reapply. I find it fascinating that they have approved the Bitcoin futures and not the underlying. It just doesn't make any sense to me, especially given the kinds of fees associated with that particular ETF. So what do you know that we know?
Listen, it comes down to politics again. The political winds are shifting. 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗃 Gensler is a political animal, right? He is very smart. He's got his hand on the till. If he wants the ETF approved, he can do it tomorrow. And he's not dumb. You can sense the shift happening. And so he's going to have to approve an ETF at one point, because the Democrats are going to lose in November, sadly. They're probably going to get wiped out. And and you're going to see, his position be under a lot more pressure. And so my sense is he's going to move sooner, not later.
If it does come later and they take a little more time to approve a spot Bitcoin ETF, do you feel like it becomes less important as there's other ways to get exposure to crypto?
You think about the amount of assets, that are out there, right? Crypto represents 40 basis points of total global wealth. Like, it's this much so far. And most of those big pools of capital, the big mutual funds, the big pension funds, there's Canadian ETFs, they won't participate.
Right.
They want a US ETF, and then you're going to see the money move.
and for ARK as well.
Yeah, sure. 40 Act funds, which are ETFs regulated by the SEC, protecting the little guy. You know, people feel safe with them. It's a familiar wrapper for a fund. So, and it's a good wrapper too, in that you know, you've got the liquidity, the tax effectiveness, the transparency. And so it's a really good wrapper.
And talk about ARK strategy a bit here. You guys have gone through Bitcoin proxies, whether it's GBTC or Coinbase or some of the crypto-related stocks. A lot of those have actually underperformed Bitcoin. I wonder why, and your take on performance.
Well, the last year has been murderous for innovation stocks. And it's because of fears of inflation and interest rates rising much higher. That has hurt the multiples, the PE ratios, valuations of these companies. I have a point of view, or we have a point of view on inflation and interest rates, but we think this has been way overdone. And it is interesting that actually just since COVID, we've seen the correlation between Bitcoin, crypto generally, and the NASDAQ. It's increased quite dramatically. Prior to that, very little correlation. Yeah. But as you said, Bitcoin has outperformed many of the innovation stocks out there. I think that's a really good sign in terms of underlying demand.
And outperformed a lot of the smaller cryptocurrencies, which hasn't always been the case. I wonder how Galaxy allocates. How do you decide? I was looking at the percentages earlier.
I've got a magic ball, and I rub it. Listen, we look for momentum in general, and so we gauge that by if it's a new protocol, developer interest, you know, investor interest, who's building on the program, is it a world-class team? And so I have a really simple model for growth equity. If the first derivative is positive, I get excited. If the second derivative is growing at an accelerating pace, so if adoption is going like this, then you just want to be long, and valuation doesn't matter that much. It's very hard to value fundamentally any of these blockchains, right? These are really bets on the future, right? We're putting this giant trust machine together, and anyone out there in the audience who can really say with confidence that it's going to be Solana and not Ethereum, or I just don't think you're being honest, right? It's such complicated stuff how these blockchains are going to fit together, which bridges are going to work, which layer 2s are going to take off. Is it going to be Starkware or Polygon or some new layer 2? And so we look at having a diversified portfolio of those bets, and we bet on the systems and the teams that we think are really world class. There are some, I used to call them ghost chains, and oh my God, I would get death threats on Twitter because people would get so upset. I'm not going to be long those things. I, quite frankly, often will be short them. And it doesn't mean those communities don't care about their token and they're really excited about those tokens. But if we don't see usage, we don't want to actually be long. And so that's kind of our themes. I keep Bitcoin as a separate bucket. Yeah. Like Bitcoin really is a macro investment. It's an investment that we think long-term is going to work because populism is taking over the world, right? I mean, if you think populism means countries spend too much money. And the US is, you know, doing a great job at that, right? First Trump and then Biden, we've blown out deficits to, you know, debt to GDP at levels that rarely you come back with without inflating the debt away or debasing your currency. And you're seeing that in almost every country. And so we kind of think Bitcoin is a great long-term hold. It will trade, you know, this year it's actually traded spectacularly well. If you think about interest rates are 150 basis points, you know, higher in the last 8 weeks. And if you look at Bitcoin versus the yen or Bitcoin versus the Chinese currency or versus the euro, it's actually done fine, right? We have a strong dollar, so Bitcoin versus the dollar is not doing as well, but it's roughly 40,000, 39.1, not that I'm looking. And like, that's actually stunning strength if you want to think about it.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons for this strength is the holding behavior. 14 million out of the 19 million Bitcoin out there have not traded in more than 6 months. And you know, we've got a lot more hodlers out there, I think, than people appreciate. Yeah. One of the reasons. And, I've said this before, but I think it's so important. Bitcoin, yes, the populist movement, but it is also a new monetary system. It is the first global, big idea, private, meaning not oversight by a government, digital, rules-based monetary system. I think it's a profound idea, and more people around the world are beginning to appreciate it as they're seeing their currencies fall apart with the dollar strong. This hits emerging markets usually hardest.
Yeah. Well, you have a $100,000, or ARK has a $100,000 price target on Bitcoin.
1 million.
1 million, excuse me. Wow, $1 million price target.
Yes.
Walk us through some of the data and factors you're looking at, and how do you get from 38,000 to $1 million bucks in a decade, less than a decade?
Yeah, less than a decade. You will find the building blocks of this in our Big Ideas 2022 presentation. It's on our site, ark-invest.com. But the largest component of that is we do believe that Bitcoin will usurp 50% of gold's role. This is digital gold. So that's roughly a $5 trillion opportunity right there. So the smallest one is remittances. We think that it will take most of the remittance market. The remittance market is a $600 billion market. We have insurance policies, high net worth individuals watching, confiscation of wealth.
Right.
And with all the turmoil in emerging markets and elsewhere, the Middle East, who knew that MBS was going to take his cousin's wealth away? So don't they wish they had some Bitcoin and private keys? So also companies allocating some of their cash or diversifying some of their cash into Bitcoin. We've seen Tesla do that, Coinbase, Square, of course, MicroStrategy, and you're going to see some countries putting Bitcoin into their treasury. We assume only 1%. So if you look at the building blocks, and then finally institutional, how much will institutional investors account for this? Well, we assume that institutional investors will put 2.5% of their allocation to Bitcoin. And that isn't even as big as the global digital gold opportunity.
Mike, do you have a Bitcoin price target? And I'd love to hear, too, what you're hearing from institutions, high net worth individuals you talk to, about why they're getting in, or some of the biggest barriers to entry as well.
Yeah, listen, I actually go to sleep praying that Bitcoin doesn't go to $1 million in a short period of time, because that would mean civil society is broken down in the US, right? You look at a place like Turkey, where you had horrific stewardship of the economy, right? Erdogan did just a terrible job. And their currency devalues, working middle class people lose their savings. And so in a lot of ways, Bitcoin is a report card on financial stewardship. And you hope that the US can get their act together between Chairman Powell and Janet Yellen. And if they do, the US, and then if Europe does, the West, isn't going to need to flood into Bitcoin, right? If we lose control of our economy, right? If we lose control of inflation, if governments can't restrict themselves and just keep, pay for all student loans, pay for it, it's really popular to pay for stuff, and confidence breaks down, you'll see Bitcoin really accelerate. And so I don't want it to really accelerate wildly in the short term, just for all our safety. I do think in the medium term, it's just going to grind, because there's almost no way we get out of this debt trap without inflating our way out, right? There's just too much debt in the US, in Europe, and around the world. And so you've got to inflate your way out of this, right? The US has got to run 4% inflation, act like it's 2%, and just hope it doesn't go this way. Otherwise, we're going to have this debt that's going to saddle generations, right? And so I do think you're going to see Bitcoin grind up because of this adoption. People are going to be like, wait a minute, 7% inflation this year, 4% inflation. Bitcoin is deflationary, or pretty close to deflationary. And so I think it's a much steadier mission. I do think 500,000, right? That's gold, if you want to think about it. So just to replace gold, you get to 500,000, depending on where gold goes. I think gold's going to go higher as well. And so I'm a medium-term 500,000 guy, and I think we could get to 1 million at one point. But I don't think in the short run we want it that high.
Well, it is a new asset class, and it is the leader of the new asset class. And so I don't think it will be going up immediately because of a breakdown in our economic prospects. And I also think that all of the technology, I'm going to take the other side of this bet, I think the technology revolution, and it's not just blockchain technology, it's genomic sequencing, robotics, energy storage, artificial intelligence, all of them are highly deflationary, and all of them will be very destructive to the traditional world order, but they will present massive opportunities for growth. So I feel as though it's going to feel chaotic like it does now, but I do believe that we're heading into a deflationary world. And it will be very good for some companies. They will boom. You lower prices, you get more demand. But other legacy industries are going to be sitting there with stranded assets. And there's going to be, again, a lot of confusion about what's going on, as there is today. So we shall see.
Has anything in the corporate earnings picture? We got numbers from Visa, American Express showing really strong consumer spending, some of the real-time credit card data. Anything you've gotten or seen in the last 2 weeks that's changed at all the way you're thinking about interest rates or inflation?
Yes, if you're looking at those companies, you're looking more at spending on services, if you parse it out. If you look at goods spending on non-durable and durable goods, it's falling apart, and inventories are rising rapidly. Now, it'll be interesting to see how this affects the macro numbers. I think first quarter GDP comes out, I think, this week, is going to look strong, but look at how much is in the form of inventories. So I think there's a bifurcation going on, which is good. Services are 2/3 of consumption, so it means we won't have a serious recession, but goods inventories building up, I think, is going to cause pricing to come down.
Got it. I want to talk about Twitter and Elon Musk. That's been another headline in the last couple of weeks here. ARK got out of Twitter. Any sense that you would reallocate into that company if Elon Musk gets this deal done?
Well, we're very interested in what he's going to do. Now, if he's taking it private, our funds can't own it anymore. Although we are out there with a public-private in registration at the SEC, so I can't talk about it. But very interested in what he's going to do. I think it's interesting. I think Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk have gotten much closer since our 𝗍𝗿𝗲 conference last year. The 𝗍𝗿,
Closers and
Bitcoin
buddies, like they're hanging out.
I sense they think in many ways similarly, not always. And so I think we're going to see a lot of crypto permeating Twitter. We already know that with Stripe Connect, that those writing paid newsletters and distributing through Twitter can get paid in Bitcoin. Well, that's very interesting, very interesting. We know that Twitter is a verification platform, and Elon Musk wants to make it more democratic than it is right now. So a verification platform, well, think about verifying digital assets. That's a perfect place to make that happen. So I think it could get pretty exciting.
Mike, what's your take on this deal and what it means for Twitter? Will they use more crypto?
Elon Musk he's wealthy. His stock didn't trade very well yesterday because people thought, okay, Elon's not going to focus more of his time on something besides SpaceX and Tesla. You don't want to short him, right? He's consistently proven that he's got extra moves in his bag of tricks. In the long run, we want decentralized versions of Twitter and Facebook, right? So people can say we don't like the board of Twitter deciding who gets deplatformed and who doesn't, and now we've got Elon who gets to decide who gets deplatformed and who doesn't. there was a lot of interesting, Jeff Bezos put a tweet up yesterday. It's like, I wonder how Elon's going to react to China, right? Elon is really reliant on China. He's really reliant on the US government, right? Broadly, his wealth comes from, government subsidies in lots of ways. And
that's
so,
not true.
well, a lot of it.
That is not
a lot of
No.
Tesla's earnings have come from subsidies.
Rebuttal from Cathie.
The contracts with SpaceX. He's got a huge plant in China. And so I think Elon is going in this with the right intention of having less
Opening up
censorship.
the algorithm. Opening up the
Yeah,
algorithm.
but he gets to
Making it
decide.
more
He
transparent.
gets to decide. And we want to move to a world where one guy doesn't get to decide or one board doesn't
I don't
get to
think
decide.
that's true. He is the first to say, in terms of free speech, you know you have it if someone you don't like is able to say something you don't like.
Talk is cheap.
Right.
We'll see what he does.
We shall see.
We'll see what he does, right?
He's usually fulfilled his
I-
promises.
I-
Maybe not on the time schedule everyone would like, but
Not on time.
he has.
I'm hopeful, but I'm just telling, I would feel much better if those projects like Facebook, like Twitter were decentralized.
And my guess is he will evolve somehow in that direction.
Let's hope.
I think, yeah.
Do you think other big tech companies could move in that direction or will be forced to if Twitter takes this on and becomes a more decentralized platform?
You know, it's very hard. This is old DNA and new DNA territory. So taking Twitter private to do the right thing is the right thing to do, right? Because there will have to be a change in the economic model. Most public companies can't change on the fly like that.
Yeah.
Something fascinating. I was at the TED conference a couple weeks ago, and I did a TED talk, and the next day, the guy who runs Instagram, one of the most senior guys at Facebook or Meta, got on stage, and he boldly proclaimed that Instagram was going to embrace Web3, that they were going to go to open source, right? This closed, walled garden was going to, he was saying they should, I'm not sure that they would, that they would embrace Web3, that they would let creators take their communities and move them from Instagram to other places. That was the same day Meta said they're going to charge 47% on any digital asset they sell, so it felt a little bit disingenuous. But when you think about what he said in front of a crowd, and it'll be on the TED Talks in 2 weeks when they go public, he was broadly saying, we had a monopoly for years and we're going to give up our monopoly. And so when I think of, I remember Peter Thiel once gave this talk about why we should invest in FANG because they were monopolies, right? They had these spectacular monopolies, and that was in like 2014. I remember buying those stocks and selling them 20% later. And they just kept going and going and going, right? These monopolies are now going to get cracked. And to me, it was shocking that the number one guy in Instagram would go on stage and say, we're going to give up our monopoly. And so it'll be really interesting to watch, what they do, not what they say. But having private property, right? If you think about Bitcoin was the first private property on the internet. Mm-hmm. Before Bitcoin, there was no private property. And if you think about capitalism, there's no capitalism without private property, right? And so in a lot of ways, we had an internet without capitalism. That's why we have these giant walled garden companies that created a lot of the wealth. And that's going to change, and you're starting to see it. And so that'll be, I think, the next 15 years, the most exciting thing.
Yeah.
In some ways, you want to be metaphorically short FANG and long Web3.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Web3 has become sort of a divisive term, at least on Twitter. What's your take on the potential there? Are you seeing applications that really don't need to be built on a decentralized platform? Where do we stand on Web3 in your eyes?
A lot of people use Metaverse Web3 as sort of a completely new movement. It is the next generation internet, and we're very much focused on decentralized services. NFTs, to your point, Mike, first, global, private, immutable, property rights system. Property rights, if you look at 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏𝗀's work or Thomas Sowell, property rights lift people and countries out of poverty. So the more decentralized, the more secure the property rights. Right. So,
any thoughts on where we stand when it comes to Web3?
Yeah, listen, I think, NFTs were the killer app of the blockchain, right? We were all waiting for something, and last year NFTs showed up, and it kind of surprised people that would be the app that got the world thinking, oh, these blockchains actually work for something, right? Before that, it felt like crypto people trading with crypto people, right? This kind of sandbox of experimentation and gambling. And now you had kind of real world applications, from the NBA to Major League Baseball to every now sports league. How do I connect to my community? What surprised me was how fast people trusted NFTs. Right? It took years to convince people that Bitcoin was a unique digital asset, right? That we've solved the double spend problem, that there was authenticity in this scarce asset. There were only 21 million Bitcoin. It took months, weeks, to convince people that that CryptoPunk number 27 was a unique digital asset, right? People just believed it. And so that's an important thing to understand, how fast people learned that we can have uniqueness because of a blockchain, right? And so I think it's a big, big deal. Listen, prices are gonna go up or down, but every single company in the every single brand, every single artist, every single musician is looking at how they can use this new technology platform to connect to their community. And what's really cool is, because we have smart contracts, you get to build all kinds of new business models into that, right? So artists getting, royalties every time their art sells, right? That was always a cool idea. Now it's a reality. And so you're going to see this amazing innovation in business model that's being built on top of these blockchains. And so I'm wildly bullish that space. Again, will Bored Apes be $3 million or $30,000? Like, that's a speculative community. You're gonna have to bet on like an speculative community. But the adoption of these platforms is only going one direction.
Well, question for you. I'd love you taking this too, but how it fits into a mainstream portfolio. If people are just buying these to hold as digital art, as collectors, and what you see the long-term potential there as. But Cathie,
I was just going to say, this is the convergence of consumption and investing. And that's a very big idea. And even in the traditional asset management world, the definition of asset management is going to change completely, influenced by what's going on in the NFT world. And we won't just hold assets, we'll become power users, staking, lending, and so forth. And the same is true in the NFT world. So you're going to get consumption and investment converging here in a way that is going to be confusing to those of us who have grown up in the traditional world. I mean, ARK spends all its time on innovation. And in fact, in the NFT world, we actually, in partnership with Signum Growth, we have the Signum ARK gallery out there in Decentraland. So we're doing a lot of experimentation right now ourselves, and we're creating a virtual innovation center in St. Pete before the physical one is ready, and bringing artists into it, to help us bring it to life.
I wonder too about DeFi. We'll wrap up here in a minute, but both of you started your career on Wall Street and traditional Wall Street. It seems like some of these decentralized exchanges have the ability to lower costs, but also cut out the middleman here. Which industries, maybe companies, do you think could be the most at risk here or the most disrupted by something like DeFi?
I think the entire financial services sector is going to have some days of reckoning. I think DeFi, it's exploding. You're right, it cuts the middlemen out, cuts the costs. As I mentioned, even so trading and sales, all of this is already being automated, right? And many people think on the asset management side we'll be safe. We won't be safe. We're trying to figure out how to integrate ourselves into digital wallets, which digital wallets are going to win, right? And we're also looking at this new asset class where effectively we have to not only manage the assets, but actually activate them. Mm-hmm. And that's a very different world.
And I know we're out of time. I want to get both of your last words on what you're watching in the next year to 2 years in terms of what's the most exciting in the space, and to bring it back to sort of the modern portfolio for maybe more of a Wall Street audience as well. Mike, we'll start with you. What's most exciting?
Listen, I think we're going to see this year prices range because I think the macro environment is going to be difficult, but you're going to continue to see adoption. And so, like I told my company, this is build, build, build. Like I don't think this is going to be a year where prices explode north, but the industry needs far better user interface, user experience. And so like UX, UI, like, you know, tell your mother to go on MetaMask and try to buy an NFT on a chain that's not Ethereum, and it's not happening, right? And so as an industry, and we're investing in lots of companies and trying to build ourselves, we need to really get to a level where the common user feels it's simple, and we're a long way from that. And so that's exciting, because when that happens, you're really going to see adoption take off.
Got it. And Cathie, what about you?
I'm looking at, or we, I should say, I have an amazing research team behind me. We're looking at second layer solutions like the Lightning Network. We're seeing Square embrace, or Block now, embrace it. Also, Robinhood has announced that it will get much more involved with the Lightning Network. So I am looking at, okay, how are these companies which are all about user experience, how are they going to make the user experience easier for people who really want to move more aggressively into the crypto ecosystem?
Terrific. Well, we'll end on that note. Mike and Cathie, honored to be up here. Thank you so much. And thanks
you,
everybody for
Thank you.
hanging out here.